Hi, my name is Kelp, and this is The Lion of Poetry. Often a poem will have a memorable line, and you might read the entire poem just to get to that one memorable line. Example, Tennyson, the great Victorian poet, wrote a very long elegiac poem commemorating the death of his close friend called In Memoriam. It's a wonderful poem, but the standout line in the poem, wait, you'll recognize it when you hear it, is, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." Another example, W.H. Auden wrote a poem called September 1st, 1939. And although the poem is all good, I think it's one of his best poems, there is one memorable standout line, at least according to my opinion. "We must love one another or die." So what if, instead of waiting for the great line in the poem, there was a poem comprised of one great line? In other words, why not make an entire poem one great line? In other words, a one-line poem. Now, we've been exploring short-form poetry in our recent episodes, for example, haiku, but the contemporary poet James Richardson has taken this to another level. James Richardson has perfected the art of the one-line poem. He calls them vectors, and he describes them as aphorisms or 10-second essays. The dictionary defines aphorism as a short, pithy observation that contains a general truth, such as, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Aphorism is often used interchangeably with proverb. Mr. Richardson, who I've been in contact with and who has graciously replied to all of my emails, sent me a piece on the differences between aphorisms and proverbs. But I would say generally that aphorisms allow more latitude than proverbs. Proverbs tend to be pretty serious. I think of the book of Proverbs in the Bible, whereas aphorisms can perhaps be more poetic and may also allow for humor. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote a good deal of his philosophy using aphorisms, and there's a man with a lot of latitude. But back to Richardson. Although he's written traditional poetry as well, he's come to be known as the master of the aphoristic form of poetry. Usually one line or two, but each of them is a gem, expressing something deep or wise or sometimes humorous or paradoxical. And he's published over 1,000 of them. Now, there's a larger question as well, the question of who decides what is art, or in this case, what is poetry. Someone once said that art is what rich people like. Throughout history, the artists who had patrons were the ones that survived, and their work survived. This may be true, but I think art also depends on the artists, in our case poets, who are brave enough to be innovators. The sonnet is a universally accepted form of poetry, but it had to have started somewhere. Somebody had to come up with it. In this sense, James Richardson is an innovator. He is a trailblazer. He didn't invent the aphorism, but he may be the first one to put it out there and say, this is a form of poetry. Now, he strikes me as a modest man. He may shy away from taking credit for this, but I think it's worthy of recognition and worthy of praise. Not only has he established this new kind of poetry, but he's done it with wonderfully elegant examples, as you'll soon see, and he's been quite prolific. And I think this might catch on. I mean, we live in an age of short attention spans. People may not have the patience for a longer poem, but for a one-line poem? Maybe. It's poetry in the world of Twitter. But unlike a tweet, which may be applicable to a specific time or a specific reference or issue, James Richardson's vectors may stick with you a bit longer, as I think you'll see. So I'm just going to run through a few of my favorites, one after another, for the next 5 minutes or so. No commentary or explication, none required. You'll just hear one aphorism after another. Part of the pleasure of these aphorisms is reading them one after another. It's kind of like eating corn chips. I'm paraphrasing Richardson now. Or I think it's kind of like reading one-panel comic strips in a book, like The Far Side or The New Yorker. Enjoyable and addictive, the more the better. So please, stop whatever else you're doing and take 5 minutes to ponder these short poems. And I've never asked you to do this before, but let's make this episode interactive. please use the comments on YouTube to tell us what is your favorite vector, or to write one of your own. Not as easy as it looks. Open yourself up to this new kind of poetry, something you might not have thought of as poetry before. Vectors, aphorisms, and 10-second essays. You have two kinds of secrets, the ones only you know, the ones only you don't. Nothing dirtier than old soap. Despair says, I cannot lift that weight. Happiness says, I do not have to. Shadows are harshest where there is only one lamp. The world is not what anyone wished for, but it's what everyone wished for. Value yourself according to the burdens that you carry, and you will find everything a burden. God help my neighbors if I love them as I love myself. For each thing we do to change, we do a million things to remain the same. How to fix the unhappy couple when it was happiness they loved in each other? You do not have to be a fire to keep one burning. Harder to laugh at the comedy if it's about you, harder to cry at the tragedy if it isn't. Even at the movies, we laugh together, we weep alone. Do not blame the fire for knowing one thing. If you want to know how they could forget you, wait till you forget them. The best way to know your faults is to notice which ones you accuse others of. I could explain, but then you would understand my explanation, not what I said. No matter how much time I save, I have only now. Disease is whatever tries to turn us into itself. All work is the avoidance of harder work. The best time is stolen time. Happiness, like water, is always available, but so often it seems we prefer a different drink. Axe built the house, but sleeps in the shed. Birds of prey don't sing. How sure we are that everyone's watching. How sure we are that no one sees. No one can do my job the way I do it, but lots of people do it fine another way. Those who worked like dogs, those who dogged it, those who screwed up, those who made all the right moves, those who didn't move at all. Here we all are. Billions of years, the dust hasn't settled. Water's still seeking its own level. The odds against today were insurmountable until it happened. The heart is a small, cracked cup, easy to fill, impossible to keep full. No one in human history has ever written exactly this sentence, or anyway, these two. Nothing important comes with instructions. Sophistication is upscale conformity. A knot is strings getting in each other's way. What keeps us together is what keeps us apart. What is more yours than what always holds you back? No one has yet failed in the future. The one thing in life I'm meant to do? Well, I have to finish this first. I'm going to start calling it predicting the past, since so much of what I want to know about the future is how I'll feel then about what I'm deciding to do now. It's about as easy to find a truth no one has ever said as a mistake no one has ever made. All the time I saved, where has that bank gone now that I want to make a withdrawal? The play called life is about having all the time in the world. So it's the old who have to be great actors. The young are just those lovable kinds of stars who play only themselves. Phrase never heard, that talented old man. What keeps me from knowing is thinking I already know. My epitaph: against his will, he mostly did what he wanted. In one of my emails, when I asked James Richardson why he called them vectors, he wrote the following. He said, I was probably thinking of math or physics. Those arrows indicating magnitude and direction somehow correlated for me with the fragmentariness of aphorisms, or especially a group of them, just as we've read. each one a different little start in a different direction. So remember, this is an interactive episode. Please share your comments, share this with others. Let's spread the word. And I invite you to check out my own personal poetry site, where I'll be sharing some vectors that I've written, inspired by Mr. James Richardson. See you next time on The Lion of Poetry.